Butterflies are amazing. Do you know what happens inside a chrysalis when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly? I used to think that a caterpillar's transformation into a butterfly was just like the bug version of a man turning into a werewolf in a B horror movie. Just like a man sprouting fur and fangs, a caterpillar would sprout wings and antennae, and boom, you have a butterfly. But what really happens is much more horrifying. Once it's inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar's stomach goes into overdrive and produces enough acid to digest its entire body. The caterpillar literally digests itself into a liquidy mush. The few surviving caterpillar cells floating around in the mush grow from scratch into a butterfly. That's gross and cool at the same time, but the craziest thing is that butterflies, which grow out of digested caterpillar goo, still retain memories formed as caterpillars. There have been scientific studies. In one study, scientists gave caterpillars electric shocks when they were exposed to certain odors. After metamorphosis, the butterflies somehow retained the conditioning to avoid the odor that they learned as caterpillars. Just think about that. Even though the caterpillar's central nervous system was completely dissolved, the butterfly that grows out of the soup of self-digested caterpillars still retains the caterpillar's memories. Anyway, I quit my job today. Theoretically, I should have no problem getting another job because I have skills for ordinary workers. Seriously. I'm an expert in provisioning cloud computing platforms, export licensing and compliance, international marketing, and corporate tax law. I have over 75 years of work experience, even though I'm only 25. I gained most of those years of experience in the past month. The job I quit involved IT support for a small company, setting up cloud computing clusters, provisioning analytics jobs, that sort of thing. 5 weeks ago, when our receptionist was on maternity leave, we all took turns answering the office's front door. One of my door duty days, I signed for a package addressed to the company's CFO, a shoebox-sized box with a cool logo of a digitized butterfly. Under the logo it said, Trans-Knowledge, Collaborative Tools for the Empowered Workplace. Metamorph IRL Gen X, HCL, Oral. My boss told me to put it on the shelf in the supply closet. The next day we had a all-hands meeting. These big surprise meetings are usually called to announce something like, we're going to be audited for ISO compliance, or there's some major new sales lead that we're going to pursue. But this time there was a big cake on the conference table with the company logo rendered on top in colored icing. Our CEO gave a little speech about how he wanted to show us all how much he appreciated the hard work we do, etc., etc. He finished his such a little speech and we all had a slice of cake. After the cake, he made another announcement. I'm afraid I have a bit of bad news, everyone. Ted McInnes is no longer with the company. He has found opportunities elsewhere. This was seriously bad news. The company's main line of revenue comes from setting up complicated technology cross-licensing deals for multinationals. Ted was our export compliance guy, our only export compliance guy. He knew everything about the intricacies of exporting law and compliance. Every deal we did relied on Ted's expertise. Frankly, I didn't see how we could even stay in business without someone like him. I've asked Shelley and Ken to step up and take over Ted's duties, our CEO continued. They're quick learners, so I'm sure we'll be back to firing on all cylinders in no time. The next morning, Shelley and Ken got into a heated discussion about export compliance right outside my office. Shelley was arguing that the technology we licensed from a German-owned firm wasn't subject to export controls because of the German ownership. Ken just wasn't buying it. No, Shell, he mansplained. They developed it under an IRAD before they were acquired by the Germans. Their obnoxious argument went on and on until I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around in my chair and yelled at both of them. Shut up. Both of you are wrong. You have to look at total investment in the technology, not just who paid for it up to when it was patented. That shut them both up. I turned around and went back to work. Later on, I reflected on my outburst. How the hell did I know that much about export licensing? I knew a ton of facts about the subject that I couldn't remember learning. I managed to convince myself that I just somehow picked it up from being exposed to the concepts at work. The following Tuesday was our annual company pizza social. We get a few hours off, paid, to eat company-provided pizza and play silly team-building games. I feel torquey going to these things, but you know, the pizza's free and the games are kind of fun. The day after the pizza social, I heard Kathy Jackson left the company. She was the VP of International Marketing. Kathy was the third person to join the company when it was founded. She was obviously really good at her job, because it was well known that she alone landed at least half the company's clients. 2 days later, while I was watching a progress bar slowly inch across a laptop screen, I had what felt like the greatest idea to ever pass through my brain. I knew how we should focus our message at the trade show next month. I knew exactly how to communicate the value proposition that would really resonate with the client base attending the show. I needed to sketch pictures of my ideas on paper. My brain was moving way too fast to try and draw out all my ideas on the computer. I raced to the supply closet to grab a big pad of paper and some markers. While I was frantically rummaging around for supplies, I noticed the box from Trans Knowledge had been opened. I peeked inside the box that it was about 3/4 full of dark glass bottles. The labels on each bottle said the same thing as the shipping label. Metamorphirelgenex, HCl oral. I was too caught up in my marketing idea to think much about the bottles. I ran back to my desk with the paper and markers and furiously scribbled out a complete marketing concept. I was so excited about my ideas, I ran down the hall with an armful of paper to the CEO's office. I just barged in while yelling, "I've got it!" The CEO was sitting at the side table next to his desk. 5 other employees were crowded around the table, which were piled high with handwritten diagrams, post-its, and printouts of marketing material. "Great!" he said casually, as if someone from the bottom of the org chart loudly barged into his office was perfectly normal. "A bunch of us have also had some great ideas about the trade show next month. Maybe you could help out." Last week, we had a company-sponsored ice cream social in the break room. The CEO served everyone ice cream from a giant 20-flavor ice cream freezer that we rented. I talked to Shelly while I was hanging out in the break room licking my triple scoop cone. She told me that Carl didn't show up to work, even though he had some kind of important filing deadline that afternoon. As the CFO, Carl was in charge of filing the company's taxes. Carl didn't show up the next day either, and Shelly was starting to freak out a little. They were good friends and spent time with each other after work. She had been trying to contact him all day. "Don't worry," I told her. "He's probably just out collecting butterflies." I knew Carl had a weird fascination with butterflies because he had a few exotic, colorful specimens mounted behind glass in his office. "Besides," I said, "the filing deadline isn't a biggie. We can just apply for an extension, and since the new revenue estimates are lower than we expected, the amortization on the German license product's a net loss, so we're good." "Yeah," Shelly answered. "You're right about the filing. We can even update last quarter's estimate to show actual negative growth too. But I'm still really worried about Carl." Shelly and I chatted about the down-in-the-weeds details of our corporate tax situation for a while. We realized that revenue was going to be really high next quarter because of our reduced labor costs. The folks who left, Ted and Kathy, were high earners. And since the company seemed to be doing well without them, there were no plans to bring anyone else in to fill their positions. Later that day, I couldn't stop thinking about butterflies. Like, I somehow caught Carl's fascination with butterflies just by talking about him earlier. I walked to Carl's office because I wanted to look at the blue bottle Carl had on display in his office. Blue bottles are found in Asia, so it's not like I was going to get a chance to look at one in the wild anytime soon. His desk was a mess. The framed blue bottle case had been knocked over and there was a crack across the glass at the front of the display case. I sat in his chair and thought about butterflies and taxes and export licensing and marketing. I thought about the increase in company's revenue without Ted and Kathy's labor costs. I thought about how much more revenue we could make if Carl never came back. Corporate taxes weren't that hard to do, I thought. I could do them myself. Why did we need to pay an expensive CFO to do them if someone like me could just do it? Then I got up. I noticed something familiar in Carl's trash bin, an empty bottle of Metamorphirelgenex HCl. I was still thinking about butterflies and taxes and corporate expenses last night. That's when I remembered something interesting. Remembered isn't quite the right word. There was knowledge in my mind that wasn't there before, yet I had no memory of learning it. It was just a fact that popped into my consciousness, like all the other facts about butterflies and taxes and marketing that had been popping into my mind recently. This thought was just a simple fact. 3 months ago, the company started leasing a second set of offices in our building. Even before the latest set of resignations, we hadn't filled up our existing space on the 14th floor. Why did we need more office space on the 7th? This morning, I got off the elevator on 7. I peered through the glass doors in the elevator lobby and looked at our company's mysterious second office suite. It was completely empty. There weren't even office partitions or desks. It was just an empty commercial space. The doors were locked, but opened when I swiped my badge. I slipped inside and looked around. One part of the space was clearly constructed for the purpose of eventually being converted into an office kitchenette. It had tile floors and roughed-in plumbing. The pre-kitchenette was the only area where there were any signs of activity. Weird activity. A dozen large white plastic barrels were arranged along the wall. Most were empty, with their lids lying next to them on the floor, but 3 of the white barrels were sealed. The plastic walls of the barrels were slightly translucent, and I could see that these were filled with some kind of pink substance. A large stainless steel piece of equipment sat next to the pink-filled barrels. It was the freezer from the ice cream social. The ice cream had been removed, but it was full of other things. A few coils of different-sized plastic tubing, a spray bottle like you'd use for gardening, and a pile of clothing. I rummaged through the clothes and somehow instantly knew whose they were. The pink blouse was Kathy's. She bought it when it was on sale at Ann Taylor. The blazer was Ted's, a gift from his daughter. The more I looked at the clothes, the more I realized how much I knew about them. I knew things about these clothes that were impossible for me to know. Where Carl got his brown shoes resold, that Kathy bought a belt when she purchased the pumps that were in the freezer. There were also 2 empty bottles of Metamorphoral Genex HCl at the bottom of the freezer. I pulled out my phone and googled Metamorphoral Genex. There was just one hit. It appeared in a scientific paper published 2 years ago. This is what it said. Methodology. We induced the first stage of metamorphosis by dosing the monarch caterpillars with Metamorphoral Genex. This induced the Capaci cascade that yields self-digestion but prevents growth of the imaginable discs. Inhibiting imageable disc growth allows us to filter out the resulting chrysalistic fluid, as Metamorphoral Genex can induce a fatal neural shedding and Capaci's cascade response in humans. These experiments were conducted under BSL-2 conditions. We exposed adult monarch butterflies to chrysalistic fluid and observed the learning aversion response to 100% of exposed subjects. The author of the paper worked for a company called Transknowledge. Suddenly, I knew what happened to Ted, Kathy, and Carl, and I knew how I acquired my newfound expertise in export licensing, marketing, and corporate tax law. I don't mean that I inferred what happened like I was Sherlock Holmes deciphering clues. I mean, reading the paper about butterfly knowledge transfer made me realize that I already knew what happened. I knew what happened because it was Carl's idea, and Carl's memories were inside my head. Carl, as the CFO, was deeply concerned about the company's falling revenue. Carl, as a butterfly enthusiast, knew about butterfly knowledge transfer experiments conducted by an ethically challenged company named Transknowledge. Carl, as apparently an evil genius, realized that he could use Transknowledge's collaborative tools for the empowered workplace to transfer skills from high earners to low earners. By eliminating the company's high earners, he could turn the finances around. I continued to replay Carl's thoughts in my own brain. The fact that the employees whose knowledge was being transferred had to go through a painful self-digestion process was, he thought, slightly unfortunate. The fact that he and his evil genius partner, our CEO, would have to feed the juices resulting from our coworkers' self-digestion the rest of the workforce via cakes, pizza, and ice cream was distasteful, but only a minor issue. I have no memories of what happened to Carl. Since Carl's clothes were in the freezer, and there were 3 barrels of self-digested human in the office space, and because I had Carl's friggin' memories in my brain, I could use Sherlock-like deductions to conclude that one of those barrels of pink goo was Carl. Did our CEO decide that Carl had to go clean up knowledge of the plot? Did Carl commit suicide? Maybe I'll never know. The knowledge transfer process can't transfer short-term memories, and whatever happened to Carl must have been quick enough to prevent long-term memories of the circumstances of his death from forming. I left the 7th floor and went straight home. I called HR and told them that I quit, effective immediately. I've decided the best way to honor the murdered co-workers is to put their own skills, now transferred into my brain, to work. I've updated my resume to include all 75 years of work experience that reside in my brain. What salary do you think I should ask for?